With that, we are ready to move on to our next presentation. So thanks again, Catherine, for that. I am going to pull up the slide for our eighth and final presentation of today, Increasing Discovery of CUNY Archival Collections Through Metadata, presented by Natalie Milbrodt and Kristen Fredericksen, both from CUNY Central Office of Library Services. As the University Archivist for the City University of New York, Natalie Milbrot's responsibilities include coordination and planning for archival preservation and records management across the university's 25 campuses. She serves on the Oral History Association's Metadata Working Group and as an advisory board member for the New York State Archives. Kristen Fredericksen is the Collaborative Systems Librarian at the City University of New York, where she provides training and technical support to 20-plus academic institutions. Kristen's areas of interest include acquisitions, cataloging, and electronic resources. Her primary focus is helping libraries find workflow solutions that fit their needs and demystifying library systems. Okay, Natalie and Kristen, thank you for being here. I'm going to stop my share and feel free to begin whenever you are ready.
Okay, thank you so much. I believe you should have the slide. Can you see our slide now? Okay,
Yes,
great.
great.
Um, so thanks for the nice introduction. It's really a privilege to be here with you today, and we're really excited to tell you a little bit about a project that is very much underway right now, something that we are in the process of figuring out, but we're happy to share about with you. So today we're going to be talking about a rollout of ArchivesSpace across all of CUNY. So just to back up, CUNY is comprised of 25 independent colleges, and they have, for the most part, independence, and they're working as their own organizations. But there are some things that are shared, some programs and systems that are shared across campuses. And our office, the Office of Library Services, is one of the CUNY central offices that serves all of the campuses. And so we are really an advocate, a convener, a service provider, and a policy source for CUNY's libraries. So that's where Kristen and I are located. And my particular role is in leading a 3-year project that was conceived of by 4 different archivists working on different campuses of CUNY who developed this project that is now funded by Mellon to address their kind of top priorities for a team to work on that is not already trying to do, their regular full-time job as archivists in CUNY. And so what we are setting out to do is to kind of fast track some important initiatives that were determined by CUNY archivists. So the first one is to conduct a massive survey of physical collections across CUNY. We're also doing some processing of archival collections that have high research value that we know people want to use and are just not available to the public yet. We're working on records management and our integration between archives and the records management programs at different campuses. We're unifying practices and just, convening and creating community amongst archivists working across CUNY. And then we're rolling out some shared systems and software that were prioritized by the archivists as things that they would really like help to, stand up and get going in these 3 years. And I will share in the chat. Let's see. This is our project website, which, feel free to take a look at that. That'll give you a little bit more information about the work that my team and I are doing. So we're 3 full-time archivists and 9 part-time associate archivists who are current grad students getting their library degrees or immediate graduates of the Queens College Library Program. So one of the systems that was prioritized is ArchivesSpace. So that's why we're going to be rolling it out. It's currently stood up as individual instances of ArchivesSpace at 12 of the 26 campuses. And Kristen will be talking a little bit more about ArchivesSpace and what it does. But for those who aren't familiar, it's a software that's very standard that archivists use for management and description of archival collections. So it's the software that someone uses to create a finding aid for their collection. It is really an accepted system amongst archivists and a real industry professional standard. So it's something that will be really wonderful to share with colleagues. And the goal in having one shared instance is to, of course, make things easier for our researchers so that they can go to one online portal and be able to access collections, information about collections from all of the campuses in one place. But it's also on the back end an opportunity for us to leverage the expertise of campuses that are better resourced in their archives with campuses that are not as well resourced. So, for example, there are many campuses across the system where the archivist, it's maybe 20% of their job to be responsible for archives. And then at other campuses, you have multiple people who are full-time working on archives. And so I think that there are some really great opportunities generally in this project to kind of leverage some of the resources that are from campuses that have more to benefit campuses that need more assistance. So in a shared instance where you combine and merge a bunch of individual databases or instances of ArchivesSpace into one, there are four kinds of records that are then suddenly visible across all of the repositories. And so those are agent and subject records. So the people that the collections are about and the topics that they're about, those records are suddenly going to be seen across all of the repositories and also to the public when they're looking at the public interface. And then on the back end, there are container profiles, which are just descriptions of the kinds of containers in which archival collections are stored, and then also location records. So an indication of like what shelf something's on in that shelf is located in what room. So all of those things are going to be visible to everyone. And so those are really the areas where we're focused. So of course, with any kind of a big rollout like this, I mean, you'll notice that less than half of CUNY campuses that we're working with already are using ArchivesSpace. So it's going to be a big lift. It's going to be a big time investment. It has been already for archivists working across the system. But it is also an opportunity to share knowledge, to unify our practices, and to develop some work outcomes that are going to ultimately really help us kind of level up what we're doing in our archival description. So, in terms of questions about how we will do this work, our people power is really in, of course, our office, our 12-person grant team, and then also people like Kristen who are working with us on the metadata side of things. Also, our CUNY archivists who are going to be the users of the system and who are really have a lot of expertise about how it works. And then out of those kind of super users who are already very familiar and experienced ArchivesSpace users, we formed a metadata working group. And so this group is responsible for answering some of these questions around policy and around procedure so that when we are all combined and merged into one shared instance, we have some direction and we can help people who are just getting into ArchivesSpace to do some training. So I think that this group is working on some initial projects which will be resolved once we launch, but I could see that same group of people perhaps turning into some kind of a governance body going forward where there will need to continue being a group of people who are making, policy and procedure decisions and making decisions about, the vendor and the contract. And I think that that will be a great group to lean into. So as far as deliverables and like what we're going to actually produce, besides the actual, technical thing of like having this shared instance where everybody's data is in there, We are also going to be creating policy that is more like strict rules around things that impact all of us very much. So, like some of those records that are shared, we're going to have some rules around, how to format things so that we're not running into problems. And then for things that are more going to be, only visible within each repository, and there's more room for individual practice that's maybe different from campus to campus, we will offer, best practices and some guidance that people can either choose to go with or have kind of their own way that they're doing things. We also, as a group, as our grant funded group, before we leave in 2 years, we want to be able to produce an idea of what roles are needed going forward, and then assigning those roles to individual people who are taking them on so that we know that after we're gone from the project, that there will be permanent staff who are taking on important responsibilities. As I mentioned, we're developing a user manual, and the goal there is that we know a lot of times it's students who are actually entering this information into ArchivesSpace, and so we want to create a really robust and you know, vigorously simplified user manual that will have lots of screenshots and be a really good resource for anyone, even an undergraduate student, to be able to follow and do excellent work in ArchivesSpace. We also want to unify our integration with AMA and with other discovery tools. And so with that, I will hand off to my colleague, Kristen, who will talk a little bit more about that work.
Thank you, Natalie. The metadata working group is where I enter the picture. The Office of Library Services, OLS, has been working with the CUNY libraries for decades. We have a long history of collaboration. But what you might notice is that archives are not mentioned at all on this slide. That's because the archives have historically not been part of the centrally managed systems at CUNY. So this grant builds connections between silos at CUNY. When I started at CUNY in late 2021, I had little to no contact with the archivists. The ingest of finding aids and Primo V had been set up for some schools, and that was the extent of the services to archives for a while. Being part of the metadata working group is the catalyst I needed to review this overlooked aspect. Next slide. So, what is ArchivesSpace? Why did we choose ArchivesSpace? It's open source, but we don't have to manage that ourselves. We have Lyrasis helping us host it. It's reliable. It accommodates many standards like EAD and Dublin Core. And most importantly for this talk, the metadata can be harvested from ArchivesSpace and sent to other systems. So it's a solution to many of the unique problems of providing adequate access to archival materials, which are more complicated to catalog than regular books and other general collections. So ArchivesSpace both manages and provides access to archival collections. On the back end, archivists use the software to keep track of important documentation regarding archival collections in their repositories and where those collections physically are, among other uses. And on the front end, ArchivesSpace is a public-facing platform for researchers and users of archives to browse and access the catalog records of archival material, which are called finding aids. Speaking of finding aids, a finding aid is just a descriptive guide to an archival collection. It contains information, like Natalie said, the people who are involved in the project, what the actual collection is about. This is a resource for researchers to know what's there because it doesn't fit all into the standard MARC catalog record, so it needs to be described in a different way. So let's look at an example. This is what the staff see in the back end of ArchivesSpace. So here we see Henry David Thoreau, that's an agent. Then we see some subjects. And then if we look at it in the public view, it has all the same information, but it's of course displayed differently. And you'll see that a lot of it is hyperlinked and it's formatted very nicely. But if you look at the data lying underneath it, this is Dublin Core. This is machine readable data. It's obviously not as pretty as either interface you saw before, but it is the same data. So having the metadata in this machine readable format means that other machines can ingest the data. It has all of the text of the finding aid with none of the formatting. And finally, this is what it currently looks like in Primo V. So now you know what a finding aid is, and you understand that the metadata can be used by other library and archival systems. Let's look at the actual metadata we're bringing in from each school. So I hinted earlier that the ArchivesSpace metadata working group was a bit of a catalyst for me. I immediately spotted opportunities for cleanup, which is my favorite thing. I love cleanup. So we got agent and subject reports from institutions, and I combined them into a huge spreadsheet. I used a pivot table, as you can see here, for a high-level overview. And this process revealed some patterns in our metadata. I'll show you 4 of them. So first of all, the first thing I noticed was these diacritic errors with the long playing records and Mexico in this screenshot. But notice how in the public view, the LPs doesn't look like LP, AOS. It's just LP apostrophe S. So we know that the diacritics are displaying correctly in the public view. We discussed this with Lyrasis, our vendor, who said these problems are the result of an improper ingest of metadata in the past. So hopefully we won't encounter this problem again, and we can just copy and paste the right diacritics into those fields to fix it. Next, I noticed leading and trailing spaces that are probably invisible to the naked eye when you're just entering. You don't notice that you have a space before Goon or a space after Ballister Cecilia. So that's another really easy thing and to clean up, and we will be working on that when we host an edit-a-thon. I used conditional formatting in Excel to identify all agents that don't contain a comma. While most agents should be in the form of last name, comma, first name, it's not necessarily wrong. Corporate names and mononyms often lack a comma. So this particular cleanup requires the staff to show a little bit of discernment or judgment in order to know what needs to be fixed and what doesn't. For instance, Claudia Cardinale would need to be changed to Cardinale, comma, Claudia, but Leonidas, if that's how you pronounce his name, does not need to be changed. So since we migrated to Alma in 2020, we've been harvesting the metadata from ArchivesSpace into Primo, our discovery layer, so patrons can see all the library's resources, physical, digital, and electronic in one place. You can bring in metadata in multiple formats from other repositories into Primo, and CUNY has been using original Dublin core. So how it works is that you set up what's called a discovery import profile, which tells Alma to fetch the metadata from ArchivesSpace and load it into Primo V. Before the grant, I didn't have much of an incentive to change the way we harvested ArchivesSpace. It was working, that was fine. But once I started looking into the metadata, I realized there was a big opportunity for improvement. We could use a different flavor of Dublin core. I know the print is really small here, but the important thing to notice is how much more metadata is available in the terms namespace on the top versus the elements namespace on the bottom. The one on the bottom is original Dublin core with only 15 pieces of metadata like creator and title. But Dublin core was later expanded to 55 pieces of metadata, as we can see on the top here. All the core elements that were in the elements namespace like creator and title are there, but there's a lot more. So I was pretty excited to start working with all of this data. And also you can see from the quote here that DCMI recommends using terms. So I thought that we would be in a better place moving forward to use the encouraged standard. Then I found out that at present, ArchivesSpace does not support OA harvesting of all 55 expanded Dublin core elements, which is a shame. So these are the fields that they do export, and the ones that are highlighted in yellow are the new ones that I will be able to bring into Primo by switching to the expanded Dublin core. So access rights and provenance are important to archives, and it's going to be great to be able to enrich the metadata with more information. At some point, I will need to submit a request for enhancement. I would love to be able to extract all our metadata from ArchivesSpace into Primo V, but not yet. So I forged ahead and created a new discovery import profile. It took me a long time to get this right and a lot of help from ex-Libris support. I didn't realize that when you use general XML, Primo won't display any fields unless you tell it to do so explicitly. So I've set it up and then I had a blank record. So with the old import profile, most of the Dublin core fields automatically map to the right Primo v fields. Not so with this generic XML. Next slide. So as I said, every field must be explicitly defined. In order to have the abstract displayed, I have to basically tell it to find the XML node called abstract and then plug that into DC terms abstract. Most of the rules look like this. You can see I have 22, but most of them just like, if this exists, then put it in this space. The last rule sets the resource type in Primo V to archival materials, and that also appears as a facet on the left. So I don't have a slide of it here, but you can also change the way fields display. For instance, an archivist requested a line break between each description in a record, and you have to go to a different place in ALMA to configure that. It's called Manage Display and Local Fields. So deciding to use the expanded Dublin core meant using a slightly different import profile, which meant using a lot more customization. But I think it'll be worth it to bring in richer metadata.
Thanks, Kristen. So, that's where we are right now. So right now we're preparing for the big merge, which will happen likely in probably the fall. We need to be. I think that we'll probably approach this in maybe October, where the systems will actually come together, and we're working now to just do some early training with archivists who are new to ArchivesSpace and figuring out different formats that are going to be good for that. So having, of course, regular meetings with this metadata working group, also having drop-in hours where people who are just kind of struggling with something can show up and just work with peers to try to figure out a solution. And then also some explicit like training sessions that will be available that we'll be offering. So those are some of our plans for the coming months. And we currently have the actual shared instance. So we're going to start creating repositories for people who are not yet in ArchivesSpace and start experimenting with what happens when, you have data in multiple repositories and how it actually looks. And so it's nice that we have a little time to be able to do some experimentation. So that's it for us, and we would be very happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you.
And thank you to both of you for presenting that. That was really great. If anyone has questions for Natalie and Kristen, please use the Q&A button and drop them there. And we'll just wait a minute and give people a chance to ask their questions. I will mention, Kristen, someone in the chat loved the irises background.
Thank you so much. I love it too.
I'm curious if others are working with ArchivesSpace and if it's something that you are, working with your catalogers or technical services folks to, manage the way that those records are exporting into an OPAC.
Yeah, if anyone is, feel free to chime in here. Okay, we do have a question. Do you have records in ALMA as well, or just in Primo VE?
Oh, did we lose Kristen? Yes, so I can answer this. Some campuses have historically made some MARC records for their archival collections and brought those into the ILS. But when they're harvested out of ArchivesSpace, they're indexing in Solr and just displaying in the discovery layer. So just in Primo, they're not actually in the ILS.
So
Okay, thank you.
the records that I'm purchasing from ArchiveSpace are not actually in the ILS, but there are other records that some people had cataloged in long before. So duplicates, and I don't know if deduplicating is this process.
That was the same thing I said. I'm glad I got that right.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got cut off.
No, that's okay. That's good. Well, and the other thing I think that we want to explore is use of archives grid and thinking about some aggregated platforms that we can use to increase discovery. So
Okay,
that's
thank
yeah.
you. Oh,
No,
sorry, I
go
didn't mean
ahead.
to cut you off.
No,
All right, I'll just move on to our next question. Did you have any difficulty reaching consensus on metadata choices? How did Kristen's title of Universally Collaborative Systems Librarian come about? That is a very cool job title. I agree.
that is, and I'll let Kristen answer that one. I think that she's just logging back in here. But in terms of coming to consensus, that's something that we're in the process of doing right now. But I think that the people who are very experienced ArchivesSpace users are also leaders otherwise within the archivist community at CUNY. And so the people who are stepping forward to say like, okay, I'll make the, list of container profile names and we can all look at them together and see if we want to go with these. And here's why I think that it should be this way and not this way. I mean, they have good reasoning and they oftentimes are really the only ones who have thought deeply about many of these decisions. And so some things I think is, the leadership that's being provided by CUNY archivists who have taken the time to really investigate this and see what other people are doing. I think that, the crowd is kind of willing to like roll with it because they just know that it's been well investigated. Now, I think that there are going to be other things. I'm sure we're going to run into, difficult questions. One of the things that we're trying to figure out right now is um, uh, questions around authority headings, because for the agent records, you can make them authorized headings. And a lot of times the people in our collections are not necessarily people of national, national level fame or bigger. So we're trying to figure out if we want to create, for instance, entity records for them in Wikidata, just so that we have some kind of an authority number and we can disambiguate between folks who might show up in multiple collections across different campuses. And then, Kristen, I don't know if you heard the question, but there was a question about how your title came to be, which I would be interested to hear as well.
So CUNY libraries migrate to Alma in August 2020, which was a hard time, especially in the city of New York. And someone had left and they were trying to decide how to fill the new position, and they decided to turn it into something a little different. It is a systems role, but they wanted to find someone who could try to bring the libraries together. So for instance, when I started, did a tour of all of the libraries to get to know everybody so that I am a face to people. So if questions about the systems, whether that's Connection or Alma or Primo V or ArchivesSpace, you have someone to come to, and I know them and their workflows and can help them connect with each other. So, and when I say collaborative systems librarian, I don't just mean the systems work together, but also trying to make people using the systems work together. And that was the idea of the position.
Very cool. Thank you. We do have another question. This looks like it might be our last one. Probably I missed this, but there is a lot of confidential information in our ArchivesSpace records, not appropriate to make publicly available. Assume the profile can handle that?
That's right. I mean, there are some things that are public and some things in ArchivesSpace that you can conceal it from being in the public interface. But I think that this kind of raises a larger question about what type of person gets an agent record. And that's something that is definitely an open conversation because sometimes people are creating agent records for administrative purposes and saying, okay, here's the person who donated the collections and here's their email and phone number. And in some cases, people are not using ArchivesSpace that way. And if someone has an agent record, it's because they are connected to the content of the collection. And that's the only reason that they're in there. So it's kind of an open question. But yes, you don't, it's not like everything you put in is going to just automatically, all that information will be public.
Okay, thank you. And that is our time. So I'd like to again thank you both, Natalie and Kristen, for the presentation. It was really fantastic. And I would like to thank all of today's presenters. I Our conference is now wrapped up, and I'm always amazed by the caliber of proposals we receive and the presentations that are shared each year. And this year has been no different. So thank you all again to those who presented and contributed today. This conference would not be what it is without you. This conference also wouldn't be what it is without our planning team. So I'd like to once again thank Jennifer Jeffrey from SUNY Potsdam, Carrie Martin from SUNY Purchase, and Jessica McGivney from SUNY Farmingdale for all of your time and effort in putting this conference together. I would also like to quickly plug our in-person conference that will be held on June 18th through the 20th at SUNY Delhi. That planning committee is currently accepting proposals and will be through the end of the month. So go to sunyla.org/SUNYLA-conference for more information. And finally, thank you to everyone who attended today. Much like we couldn't have a conference without our presenters, we wouldn't have any conference if no one attended. So I would just like to thank all of you for being here today and for asking our presenters great questions and for keeping the chat lively. Keep your eyes on your inboxes. We will be sending out emails with the link to our website that will have the recordings and slides and other information posted as soon as they have been processed and are available. I would estimate that would be about 2 weeks from now, but give or take. Also, when you close out of Zoom today, you'll see a link to a feedback survey. We'd appreciate it if you take a moment to fill that out. We're always, interested in ways to make the conference better and looking for ideas for future conferences. So with that, we're finished. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great weekend, and we hope to see you next year.